We are here.
We did it. Yes. It's an early morning in a comedy club.
It is, exactly. It's eerily quiet.
Yeah, it's always strange to be in these places in the morning. You're like, oh, this is what this looks like in the daylight.
Exactly.
I'm so grateful to have you on.
You.
I'm just excited. I feel like I told somebody last night that I was interviewing you and they're like, she's an American hero.
Oh my gosh, no. I know you reached out to me. It was probably a couple years ago at this point. And, the timing just didn't work out. You were still in LA at the time. And I know we had tried a couple of times, even just before you moved, I think.
Yep.
And then there was there's been like for the last year, I've been living under the book publisher's deadline world, where at different times, just like, oh my gosh, I've got to clear the whole calendar because I got to deliver it by this time. It's the first time I've ever written a book. So it was an interesting process. All of that is to say thank you for your patience.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're finally here.
You also, I think, you were like an active duty too at some point.
I did. I deployed in 2021.
Okay.
And then in really throughout that period, I'm in the Army Reserve still. So there's different times where you get called in to do things. And so.
Wow. Yeah, he was like, she still fought for our country and really stayed independent and maintained the sense of independence even when everybody was mad at you all the time. I think that is the hard thing about being someone who's willing to call out, both sides, is that you end up hearing it. How have you
from both sides, all sides rather,
all the time? You're always making everyone angry at all times. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Okay.
I'm great. And just to, it's not making everyone angry all the time. It's experiencing the wrath of certain people, who are sometimes hard to tell the difference between them, even though they may go by a different party affiliation or whatever. It's the people in politics, both politicians, media, big tech, all of the people who live in that ecosystem, who feel threatened by people like me who tell the truth.
Yep.
And who are willing to call bullshit when it's right in front of our face. We all see it. But oftentimes either number one, they see it and they're trying to hide it to protect themselves, or they're so deep in their selfish ambition and arrogance and desire for power. Some of them don't actually see the truth, which is it's a pretty sick state of mind to be in. But if those are the people I'm pissing off, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
It reminds me of that Lauryn Hill line where she's in Forgive Them, Father.
Oh,
and she's
yes.
like, they're lying to themselves.
Yeah.
I often try to have that. One of the things I really loved about your book and that I didn't know about you really was that you grew up with God.
Yes.
And you're very grounded in God. And the thing that struck me probably the most of everything that I read in your book, which is a lot of stuff that I can identify with. And I realized when you were talking about how Democratic presidents, one after the other, stopped using the word God, I was like, that's why I feel more right than I did, because even
right in a political sense,
sense, and probably why people,
and in a truthful sense,
and probably why people now say, oh, she's just this right wing grifter or whatever they want to call me, but they never really let go of God. And I know that now it's like, oh, the Christian nationalists, if you even believe in God, which seems like that's a
radical view.
Yeah, that's a radical view. Yeah. And that is something that I really want to hear more about from you, just how do you, it was interesting too that you were raised with the Bhagavad Gita, which I became familiar with when I got certified in yoga, like everybody in my generation did.
That's great.
You didn't go to college. You became a waitress and got a yoga
you probably
certification.
got more out of becoming certified as a yoga teacher than you would have out of college.
Probably. I love
in
the
Bhagavad Gita.
I love the Gita. I just love it. And so that was interesting that you were raised with God and the Gita. And so tell me just about that.
So for people who don't know, the Bhagavad Gita is an ancient scripture that comes from India. Bhagavad Gita Gita means song of God. And it is a scripture that doesn't belong to one religion or another. It is one of the Hindu texts, but I think one of the most misunderstood things about Hinduism is that it is a monotheistic religion, one God, many names, and it is non-sectarian, meaning whether you consider yourself a Christian or a Hindu or Muslim or agnostic or whatever your path is that you've chosen in your own relationship with God, the Bhagavad Gita is a scripture for everyone. And so for me, being raised with readings, bedtime stories from the Bhagavad Gita as well as the New Testament. My mom was raised Episcopalian, my dad Catholic. My dad is a lector at his Catholic church in Hawaii. But both were very drawn to the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita because it allowed them to learn more and develop a more personal relationship with God than they had before, and not seeing God as some far off, distant, kind of unknowable person or thing or force, but instead recognizing that, which is really the one of the most famous verses from the Bible, which is from Jesus Christ saying, my first and foremost commandment is to love God with all your heart, your entire mind, your entire being. And my second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so for both of them to have grown up with verses from the Bible like that, and then to also find in the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures ways that they could actually do that, to love God as a person, to love God as your very best friend in the world, and have that personal relationship with God, is something that I not only learned, but I actually experienced it myself from a young age, the truth of that. It wasn't like, okay, you will do this or you will do that. I knew and understood from a young age that, real religion, whatever the label, real religion is love for God. And unfortunately, oftentimes people mistake religion for institutions or buildings or, I don't know, figures in quote unquote religion. But when it really comes right down to it, real religion is love for God. And that has been the central inspiration and motivation of my life. It is that personal relationship with God that I strive to continue to cultivate every day. And it is the peace and the strength and clarity that comes from that relationship with God that allows me to live and work in this toxic world of politics and frankly media and whatever else. I mean, there's unfortunately a lot of darkness and toxicity in the world today, and yet and even being a soldier and deploying into war and being confronted with death and destruction and suffering, and always just find my shelter and love and peace and understanding in that continuous daily practice of spending time alone with God in prayer and knowing that wherever I am in the world, no matter what's going on around me, no matter who is attacking me, if I am doing my best to be pleasing to God and to love God, all is good and all will be good.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important because I find I stumbled into the culture wars. I got caught in the crossfire of them a bit, just writing at Playboy at a time when it was very strange to be writing to men, writing, being in comedy, right as Trump was kind of going from this joke to, the worst thing in the world. I was at the intersection of a lot of this stuff and then started just joking and commenting on it, but I don't find it aspirational. It was something that I actually, that's why I gravitated to you, was that in this world that feels pretty dark. I thought that like Hollywood was dark, which it is, but media and politics, I was not exposed to that until the past 8 years. And it is, that's why I've even pivoted back more to comedy, because it's so hard to find anything aspirational.
Yeah.
And that's actually why I love your book as well, is that you remind me of the aspirational texts that are the basis of this country. They were inspiring. They should be things that we draw strength from and that we return to, much like religious texts in some way, for strength and clarity. And that is something that is unsettling, like you say, talking about. And again, this comes to like comedy, I think, why it's been this controversial thing, because it is free speech.
Exactly.
It is the highest representative of free speech, is being able to say the most hyperbolic, offensive things and still be allowed to say them and not end up in jail for memes or whatever. Like they're in some of these European countries that have these no free speech.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, and I came from the left like yourself and was very much felt like I was in upside down world for many years, for the past, it was very disorienting. How did you orient yourself because it seems like from your book, you've experienced a pretty radical, like in some ways been
change within the Democrat.
Radicalized. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't feel like I've been quote unquote radicalized at all. What I have witnessed is an extreme radicalization of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And I think that's where, people like you and I who have been in and around that side of politics, I get people, and you probably get it as well. People say, oh gosh, you sound like a conservative, or you sound like a right-wing person or whatever. But for me, there's not fundamentally been a huge shift in my principles and my beliefs.
Right.
Yeah, sure. On certain issues, as I've learned more, I've shifted my position, as I think we should all be open to doing when you get more information or have new experiences. But fundamentally, I've always been an independent thinker. I have been passionate about making sure that the reason I got involved with politics in the first place growing up in Hawaii was to protect our home.
Yep.
Keep our oceans clean, make sure that our open spaces are protected, actual like focusing on conservation and being custodians of God's creation rather than those who exploit what he has given us to live in and around. And I have stood for freedom, and I joined the Democratic Party because I thought at that time, over 20 years ago, this is a party that is a big open tent party, welcomes people with different views and opinions on issues, welcomes people from all different religious backgrounds, welcomes people who really believe in civil liberties and our right to privacy, the things that are enshrined in our Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I still believe strongly in those things. You look at the Democratic Party traditionally having been the party of working people, the party that would champion the plight of the little guy who's being screwed over by the quote unquote elite.
Yep.
And then you look at where we are today, and this shift has happened over time, but I feel like over the last 5 years or so, maybe since 2016, it's like gone on this like hyper speed trajectory from just like a slow build to now we are at a height of woke extremism that's brought us to the point where it's just like the things that used to happen in secret and in back rooms in Washington are now happening in broad daylight, are being talked about on a daily basis as though it's normal. Like, yeah, maybe the free speech, maybe free speech isn't relevant anymore. There are certain people who should be silenced in this country. The government should be censoring Americans. Like just a few years ago, that would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. But that's the reality of where the people who are in power leading the Democratic Party today, that is truly what they believe, or if they don't believe it, they are certainly pushing it. And both in the book, as well as in, speeches and interviews and things that I'm doing now, I make it a point to make a distinction between the Democrat elite and those in power of the Democratic Party versus Democrats.
Right.
Because I hear from a lot of people across the country who still consider themselves Democrats, but who are feeling the way that we feel,
right,
in that frustration and even sadness and being disheartened about the fact that this party that they have been associated with or identified with in some ways for so long is not only unrecognizable, which it is unrecognizable, but they're actually destroying the fabric of the foundation of this country that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what is most dangerous. And that's what that is what's on the ballot this year in this election.
When you say elite, how do you define elite?
It is those in power who live in that little bubble in Washington, who are disconnected from the reality of the American people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not associated with a certain dollar amount of wealth or this or that. I mean, hey, this is America. We believe in capitalism.
Yeah.
You go work hard and you get rich, like good for you.
Mm-hmm.
The elite is, to me, it's a mindset that is centered around power.
Interesting.
And it exists both within those who hold public office. It exists within, unnamed bureaucrats that exist across the federal government. It exists within the mainstream propaganda media. It exists within big tech. It exists within the national security state. These people in different positions of power, great power and influence, who are acting in their own selfish interests rather than in the interests of the greater good and the well-being and interests of the American people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking one of the things, like, you can't focus on all of it because there's too much.
There's a lot.
And one of the things that just kind of got swept under the rug under like all the Kate Middleton nonsense that everyone was obsessed with.
Which is still, like, every day there's new headlines.
I'm like, the Department of Labor just made it like basically illegal to be a freaking independent contractor.
Yes.
And you guys are worried about Kate Middleton?
And they tried to push this through. And they couldn't do it actually by making it a law. So then they just went backdoor with the Department of Labor, which is how so much of the bullshit COVID stuff came down. Yep. And it's just a decree. And I mean, I know some people are fighting against it, but not enough people. Everybody should be mad about this because, again, it's another instance of where, and this is the Biden administration that's doing this, we know what's best for you.
Yes.
We know that these companies you're choosing to work for that give you flexibility if you're a single mom, if you have disabilities, if you're trying to make extra money on the side so your daughter can go to college, whatever it might be, you are working for these evil corporations and you should be in a union or work for the government or basically be employed. Yeah. And that it makes my blood boil. I've been fighting against this since it was AB 5 in California and warned everybody that it was going to be nationalized. And now here it is.
Because it passed in California, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster. And they had so many problems with it. They had to do millions of different carve outs.
Right.
And people had to leave. I knew so many single moms and people who had to literally leave California before even the COVID people fled because they couldn't make ends meet because they basically people they were freelancing for were like, we'll have to put you on the payroll and that it is.
Or just you can't work for us anymore because we can't afford to put you on payroll.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's such a great example. And unfortunately there are so many across the federal government. But that one's a great example. Like what is at the crux of that issue? It is what you pointed out, that the government knows what's best for us better than we do, that they are afraid of us making the quote unquote wrong choice. So they're going to protect us from being such idiots that we make decisions that are destructive for ourselves. And where does that go? It comes down to freedom. They don't want to allow us to have the freedom to make our own decisions for
Yeah.
ourselves. And they don't respect the fact that, you know, I want the freedom to be able to make my own choices, even if that means I make the wrong choice. And guess what? I deal with the consequences of that. I learn from that decision and from that action, and have the freedom to make other choices in my future. And that is, so we talk about the Democrat elite, the power elite, that is what we're talking about. And while in my book, I focus a lot, I mean, the title of the book is For Love of Country, Leave the Democrat Party Behind.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty direct
Call to
title
action.
that speaks to, I mean, really it speaks to a lot of my own experience within the Democratic Party, but also in the book, I point out the truth that there are many of these problems are not isolated to the Democratic Party, and that on certain issues, especially related to war, quote unquote, national security,
The Patriot Act,
and big government spending. Unfortunately, there is a uniparty in Washington that is made up of those who care more about power than what's in the best interest of the people, and so we have to be weary of people who are those power seekers, because they exist in both parties.
Oh yeah, that's like when you look at the lists of people who make money because you can apparently just trade
Insider
stock.
trading.
It's crazy.
Totally. It is nuts.
How is it? I'm always like, how is this legal.com? Because why would you, how are you 100 millionaire when you're supposed to be a public servant?
Yeah.
It is crazy to me. There's no incentive to change that.
They won't change it for themselves.
No, like you said in your book, there's lots of lip service a lot of the time so that the donors can see that you're doing something for these bills that never get passed. They know they won't get passed.
No. And that this is a good example where even Nancy Pelosi, when she was speaker, she's like, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to pass this legislation, but there are technical problems with it and problems with the language. And it's like, no. I was in Congress from 2013 to January 3rd of 2021. I introduced legislation that would have banned not only members of Congress from trading in stocks, also their spouses and their senior staff, which a lot of times gets kind of like, swept under the rug because the power, again, it's not the elected faces that are behind a lot of these things. There are some high paid senior staff are really the ones who are calling the shots. They're the ones passing the notes to the member of Congress when they're in a hearing saying like, here's what you should say, or here's the way you should vote, or whatever. But there was no interest in passing the legislation then. There's certainly no interest in passing it now. And I heard yesterday that there was a member of Congress who's a Republican, who is one of those people who's profiting heavily on this insider trading, who basically said, hey, if members of Congress were not allowed to reap the benefits of the position, then no one who is qualified or intelligent would ever run for Congress.
What?
Exactly.
No one's...
And he didn't say this in private to like a friend. Like this was a public statement, which again, brazen, bold, and a big fuck you to the people.
But
because you'll get thrown in jail if you do it.
Yeah.
But hey, I'm a member of Congress. They don't pay us enough, they say, and so we should be allowed. We should be allowed because we're special.
Yeah, no, that's insane. And it does feel like with a lot of, because it's this gerontocracy, as many people have talked about, it is even more apparent that these are not the people who are making decisions.
Yeah.
It is these senior staff or lobbyists in cahoots with senior staff. We know that these people who like short out mid-sentence are not fully in charge right now.
Yeah.
And that feels like a slap in the face. And I'm not sure that's where, because I keep saying to people, if I don't believe that my vote matters and I don't believe that the democratic process is fair, democracy is already done. Yeah. I have to have faith and then I feel like we're at this point in America, as you point out, where Americans it's like the trust in institutions is an all-time low.
Yeah.
And then you see people kind of latching onto conspiracy theories. And I say that in quotes because they're not all conspiracy theories in the bad sense of the word. They're actual conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
But then you can go too far in that direction too. What do you recommend that Americans do? As someone who's been in service and in the belly of the beast, how does the average American sit with all of this knowledge? Because they'll get gaslit. It's like, oh, you're just crazy. You're not seeing this. Or it's just like you said, brazen and in your face and fuck you, which makes you reactive. So what is your advice to just an average American?
I think that the number one thing is question everything.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take anything at face value.
Mm-hmm.
You should be alarmed. You know, there's a word that the Washington elite throw out, which is the norms. And you'll hear this from people who are Democrats. You'll hear this from people like Nikki Haley, who's a Republican. You'll hear this from Mike Pence. You'll hear this from people who are part of that permanent Washington establishment, where as power shifts and changes hands from one party to another, there are certain things about Washington that never change. And so we are now living at a time where because of Donald Trump and the threat that he poses to all of them from both parties, because he doesn't respect their establishment, swamp, whatever you want to call it, so-called authority, what they're telling the American people is, hey, we just need to return to the norms. We need to get back to the norms or what has been tradition and all of these things that they're saying because they want people to feel like, get this warm and fuzzy feeling of, you know, mom's fresh baked apple pie, you know, sitting on the counter and the kids playing on the front lawn and like, which, you know, peace, stability, dependability, certainty. Here's the problem with that argument and why I encourage people to question everything is this norm that they speak of is a norm that is based on us being in a constant state of war, on the military industrial complex continuing to profit off of the backs of the American people, a continuation of the print more money and spend us farther and farther into debt, no matter how much they argue for, you know, fiscal responsibility. They have no problem writing blank checks of hundreds of billions of dollars to fund a proxy war against Russia via Ukraine, using the Ukrainian people's lives in this effort. And yet they still claim, at which they will not allow any accountability for how that money is being spent. And yet they claim fiscal responsibility, but they don't have enough money to go and help my friends in West Maui who are still homeless because of that historic fire that took place. So question everything. People say, for example, the Department of Education. Why we should be asking the question, why do we need a federal Department of Education? Local communities all across the country, you have local school boards, you have local governance, you have funding that's coming from every state has a different model. In Hawaii, for example, funding for education comes through the general fund. Property taxes do not fund education in Hawaii. Property taxes do fund education in a lot of other parts of the country. Different models of education, different needs, different cultures,
different ecosystems,
different needs. I mean, this kind of governance should be happening at the local level. Parents should have the ability to choose what kind of education works best for their specific child. Whether it's, I was homeschooled, fourth of 5 kids, we were homeschooled. You met my sister outside. You know, she got a scholarship that she went out and got. It's called a Millennium Scholarship, free ride to any school in the country, including room and board, because she's awesome and she worked really hard and she studied really hard. Homeschool was great for us. I'm so grateful to have had that experience. Other parents, maybe it's a charter school.
Yep.
Maybe it's a religious school. Maybe it's public school. Whatever the case may be, parents should be empowered to make those choices. Why should we have a federal Department of Education? Why should we pay for this bureaucracy so that they can do what you talked about, Department of Labor doing, pass all of these rules and regulations dictating to schools and parents and teachers how our kids should somehow squeeze into this cookie cutter education system? And by the way, this is Democrats and Republicans who've been behind this over the years. Why? What are we paying for? You know, a few years ago, this idea was brought up to me when I think it was early on in my time in Congress. People were like, well, we should get rid of the Department of Education. And I thought, well, God, that sounds kind of extreme. Like, yeah, we should fix it, but really get rid of it. But the more I learned and the more I saw and the more dysfunction I saw, and the more, and I talk about this in the book as well, the incredibly high level of functional illiteracy
it's insane.
that we see kids graduating from high school with, what to speak of young adults who are trying to get out in the economy or try to find a job or do whatever it is they want to do. Our system is broken. That's my point. The education system is broken.
Very broken. The
answer that a lot of Democrats always give is, well, it's because it's an underfunded system. Yeah, teachers are still paid like shit. Teachers are freaking amazing humans.
Yeah.
Amazing people who choose to do that as a profession. I have nothing but respect for teachers. They are underpaid and undervalued and under-resourced.
Yeah.
100% across the board. Well, where is all this money going to?
Administration.
Right.
Yeah.
The administration. And to what end? If you were to tell me, and this kind of measurement of metrics and effects and performance, I think needs to be done across every agency in the federal government. But using education as the example, if you say, okay, show me the trend of how funding for education has increased and how that matches with measures of performance and effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
How has that actually benefited our kids so that they are set up for success?
Mm-hmm.
The picture is abysmal.
Yeah.
And then you layer on top, that's just basic, like, hey, reading, writing, math, science, civics, which really isn't being taught in our schools. Like the Constitution is not being really taught in our schools. But then you layer on top of that things like the Biden administration, the year of the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which was literally passed to ensure equal opportunity for women and girls in sports, in school, both, K through 12 as well as in college, that if you are receiving public funds, taxpayer money for your school, you will provide equal opportunity for women and girls to engage in sports just like the boys and men have.
Mm-hmm.
The language of Title IX is like something like 24 words. That's it.
Yeah.
And it was passed out of a recognition of the difference in biological sex between men and women and the imbalance that existed at that time, both in women and girls being able to get into certain schools or go to medical school or go to law school, but also in sports. The boys have a locker room. They have different sports teams. The girls did not.
Yeah.
This is the environment that my mom grew up in. And Democrats for so long touted their success in championing Title IX, and were able to point to those growing metrics of like, this is not only about, okay, cool, yes, they have the opportunity to play sports, but that led to scholarships.
Yep.
It led to the experience of being a leader on a team and how that translated into success in business and in other sectors. So on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, you'd think it would be a day to uplift the success of women and girls in our society, some of which is attributed to the passage of Title IX. Instead of celebrating women and accomplishments, the Biden administration backdoored a rule change through the Department of Education that added gender identity to Title IX, which as a consequence is resulting in more and more men and boys taking opportunities away from women and girls. And if that wasn't bad enough, the stick that they attached to it was telling schools that K through 12 specifically, unless you allow those who identify as trans to compete in the sport of their
Choice.
gender, I guess, that they are identifying with on any given day.
Mhm.
If you don't follow this rule, we will remove your funding for what's called free and reduced lunch. And that's a term that's used in the government to identify kids who come from low income families. And they can't afford to pay whatever the fee is for you to go and buy breakfast and lunch at school. So a big chunk of federal money goes to support kids in low income areas, in poverty areas, kids who are designated as those who qualify for free or reduced lunch. Federal government says, unless you allow biological boys to compete against girls on their team, we're going to take away your free and reduced lunch funding. So how sick is that?
It's
Literally.
crazy.
You're taking food out of the mouths of kids whose families are least able to afford it in order to force these schools to comply with this insane and destructive policy that actually hurts women and girls.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area where I have been radicalized.
Yeah. But see, this is the thing though. And I want to tell you this. I want to tell whoever's watching this, you have not been radicalized.
I've been radicalized to fight.
To fight.
So that's
Yes.
what I mean, radicalized.
They are holding the radically insane position.
Yes.
But yes,
But
I
I've
agree.
been radicalized to, I mean, again, I had a child, so I joke like I was kind of this Gen Xer who was like, I can just sit in the back of the class and laugh at how dumb all you are, people who care.
Right.
And then I had a baby and I was like, oh shit. I have skin in, like, I've joked, I have literal skin in the game
Literally.
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I have to care what she's being taught.
Yeah.
And I cared before, and I was screaming women for like the past 8 years because this was the beginning of me being like, what? This is one of the craziest things. And you'll get caught. I just over and over now on Dumpster Fire, I'm like, stop being afraid of being called a transphobe because you've got to protect. This is not protecting women and girls. And now poor people are suffering consequences too. It's so banana town.
Yeah.
I can't believe how many conversations I've had about this.
Yeah.
And every time I have a conversation about it, I am still in disbelief that this is even a thing.
Yeah. And that's where, in addition, like, yes, question everything. Know that the truth is the truth. It's not my truth, your truth, someone else's truth. The truth is the truth. And when we stand on the side of objective truth and reality, you are standing on the side of what is right. And the more we collectively speak up, whether it's in small circles with our friends, or if it's on social media, if that's your thing, or whatever the place or format is, the more that we are the one who stands up and speaks the truth respectfully, you don't have to be an asshole about it. The more others, I guarantee there are people in those circles, in those rooms who are also afraid, and you will help inspire and encourage them to have the courage to stand up and speak the truth, knowing like, no, you're not alone. And this is what we must do to save our country, literally to save our country. You mentioned the flaws in our election systems and how easy it is for us to feel hopeless, both because of the direction those in power are taking us, but also because there are huge problems with our election systems. I've experienced many of them, and it's not, I think too often people focus solely on how the votes are counted as the biggest problem. There are problems there. I introduced legislation in Congress today. We've got to have paper ballots. If you're going to use an electronic system, you have to have a verifiable paper record of that vote that's cast so that it can truly be audited.
Right.
So if someone goes
like
in and tries
tracking.
to, well, right. So like, I in Hawaii, when I've gone and voted, I'm old school. I like to go and vote in person.
Me too.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
But sometimes I've used the electronic system, and what it does is I go and I punch in the buttons of who I wanted to vote for, And then it actually prints out on the spot a receipt, essentially, of, okay, yep, these were the votes that I cast. This is correct. And if it's incorrect, I can go back to the clerk and say, hey, there's something wrong with the machine. This is not how I voted. And then there's a paper record also in their machine of that vote. So if you're going to use those electronic systems, which by and large are highly hackable, you have to have that live paper record so that an audit can be conducted at any time. These are simple things that need to be done, but the broader concern that we all need to be aware of around our election systems are these information, operations that go on, the weaponization and politicization that we've seen of the Department of Justice and law enforcement and many other agencies throughout from pre-Trump election in 2016 and continuing on, the collusion between the political parties, the propaganda media, and big tech to predetermine which candidates we're allowed to hear from, what they want us to know about those candidates, whether it be positive or negative, and their efforts to either lift up certain candidates in a positive light while trying to ruin the credibility of others. They did this to me when I ran in 2020. They're doing it to Bobby Kennedy now. They're doing it to Trump. They've done it to Trump ever since he started running.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of things that we need to be aware of that are happening. But in order to fix all of these things that we're talking about that are broken, we have to recognize that the answer to these problems and how we fix them, it lies in those founding documents.
Right.
Our founding fathers told us that our government exists with the consent of the governed, that we can have a government of, by, and for the people. But that only happens if we actually make it happen. So while it's tempting to stay home, while it's tempting to say, you know what, all hope is lost, we're screwed because the powers that be are so powerful. They have so much money. They have the mainstream media. They have all of the big tech. Google just was recently found yet again to have been manipulating search engine results and what emails go into your spam box in Gmail and which don't, to try to influence voters towards a certain candidates of a certain party versus others. And it wouldn't shock you to know that, they're tilting the scales on behalf of Democrats and not Republicans.
Right.
But the only way that we fix this is by voting. The only way that we actually get our country back on track is by exercising the freedoms, our freedoms, that those in power are trying to take away, and making sure that our voices are heard all the time and at the ballot box. Be discerning, think critically, not just when looking at people of one party, but people of both parties or people of whatever their political persuasion may be, and really look at fundamentally, are these people who, I think the two most important qualifications are, one, are they coming with the servant's heart? Are they coming at this with a desire to actually work for the interests of the American people or not? And number two, right alongside that is, are they truly committed to upholding the Constitution? Are they talking about the Constitution? Are they talking about our God-given rights and freedoms that are enshrined in those founding documents? I think it's a big red flag if you have a candidate who's not raising these issues.
Yeah.
And they'd rather talk about, how all white people are racist, no matter who they are or where they come from or what background they have.
Yeah.
Or whatever the distraction is that they're trying to get us to pay attention. You mentioned the Kate Middleton thing. You mentioned there's always something that they're trying to use to distract us away from the truth and the reality of how they're abusing their power, taking away our rights and liberty to benefit themselves.
Yeah,
I feel like I just gave a long speech. Sorry.
No.
I obviously feel pretty strongly about these things because I have lived in and seen that toxic underbelly of our politics and the media, and how all of these forces very intentionally collude together against our interests. And I'm not giving up the fight, even though I have seen it all and experienced experience the kind of the direct consequences
Yeah.
of that. I feel hopeful because the real power in this country lies in the hands of we the people.
Yeah.
Which is why they're so fucking afraid of us.
Yeah.
They're afraid of a free people, a free society, people who think for themselves. And it's not about like, we haven't had a chance to talk about issues. We can all have discussions about one issue versus another.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be having more of those discussions. But fundamentally, I know for certain that we can save our country if we come together as Americans. I don't care what your party is.
Mm-hmm.
If we come together as Americans around these fundamental principles that our country was founded upon.
Yes.
Knowing that, hey, even our founding fathers disagreed on a lot of things, like fierce disagreements, huge arguments, sometimes in the middle of the quote unquote town square. They weren't afraid to argue with each other passionately. They felt strongly about certain things. But fundamentally, what they came together around is found in those documents. And that is, to me, the most important thing that we need to focus on as we look at how we cast our votes in this upcoming election and the decisions that we make.
So for people who there's a lot of people I wrote about, like the battle cry of the politically homeless many years ago. I think someone told me that I just got an email from the Dispatch and they were like, oh, a lot of people are politically homeless. Jonathan Haidt just recently was like, I pretty much identify as politically homeless. So I feel like there are a lot of people who feel that way and they can't necessarily hold their nose and vote for Trump for whatever reason. Do you think that we're at a point where there's an opportunity for a third party to really rise and win? Or is this do or die? You have to hold your nose and vote for Trump. Do you have an opinion on that?
I don't know yet is the short answer.
Okay.
I am very, it is a little early. I think it's important as people are thinking through this decision, just to be very practical and clear-eyed. I looked at running for president as an independent, and what I learned a lot of lessons from my run in 2020 about what it takes to go and fight these battles on the political front.
Yeah, especially as an independent.
Yep. I mean, obviously, the best way to sum it up for me was my experience running in the Democratic primary in 2020 and having a little bit of naivete in the beginning, thinking like, hey, I know that this is going to be very hard. I know it's going to require a lot of money. I will be outspent and outraised by many of these other big names in politics, but at least I will have as fair a shot as anyone else running to stand on that debate stage and make my case to the American people.
Yeah.
About how the Democratic Party needs to return to being the party of JFK and Martin Luther King, the party of freedom, the party of the everyday American in this country. That was an incredibly naive thought, which I learned very quickly.
Interesting.
The attacks on me started from the very moment I literally walked up onto the stage to announce my candidacy. Because I'd been in Congress for many years already. I was a known challenger of the military-industrial complex, of the Clinton, machine, and kind of the untouchable, powerful people in Democratic politics. So they knew who I was and am, and the fact that I was willing to speak the truth, no matter how politically inconvenient it may be. Anyway, I running as an independent, having a third party option, it requires an immense amount of money.
Yeah.
As horrible as that is, it's just reality. Because you're taking on the Democratic Party, you're taking on the Republican Party, you're taking on the mainstream media, you're taking on big tech, you're taking on the military-industrial complex, you're taking on big pharma, you're taking on big education, you're taking on all of these super powerful, entrenched machines who feel threatened.
Yeah.
They feel threatened. And even I mean, it was no mistake that after Ross Perot mounted a very credible challenge before he dropped out. He was polling higher than Bill Clinton at a certain point. It was not a mistake that both parties came together after that election and made it incredibly more difficult for a third party candidate to even get on ballots.
Wow.
It would not surprise me this election year if there are no presidential debates. And for somebody running as an independent, that would be your opportunity to be able to
I didn't even consider
get
that.
the side-by-side comparison and actually have that argument in front of the American people.
Right.
Tens of millions of Americans, ideally hundreds of millions if everybody actually watched.
Right.
But this is a year where, Trump has said, I'll debate Biden anywhere, anytime. President Biden chose not to do a very soft, fluffy interview around the Super Bowl, which to me is like, man, if you want kind of the easy exposure during the day that the vast majority of Americans are glued to their television, why wouldn't you take advantage of that? So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't have debate. So all of this is to say there are realities that exist around whether or not a third party candidate can be viable. First and foremost of which is, can they actually get on the ballot? I've gotten to know Bobby and I really like him a lot. But I have a lot of questions about whether or not he will be able to accomplish all that he seeks to accomplish. First and foremost of which is getting on the ballot in all 50 states.
Right.
And so this has been a roundabout way for me to really make the point of, as we go through this process, I encourage people to try to kind of set their emotions aside and their feelings about different candidates and look at the harsh reality of what we are facing. And that harsh reality has been proven by facts and evidence, which is the Biden-Harris administration has been the most radical, extreme, so-called progressive, aggressive administration ever in our country's history. And they're proud of it. And if they are allowed to remain in power, we've already seen how boldly they are willing to take away our freedom in every respect. How willing they are to have big tech silence and censor us at their behest.
I'm so worried about the currency.
Yes, the central bank digital currency, how they want to control our money. If you allow someone to control your wallet, they control your freedom. They are trying to suppress our free speech. They are violating our civil liberties and arresting everyday Americans who happen to challenge their authority and politics. The list goes on, and I had to write a book that I literally was editing up until the very day I was forced to send it to the printer, because unfortunately there are more and more examples every day.
Yep.
The fact is, and this is a fact, if they are allowed to remain in power, we will likely, we will not be able to come back from the erosion and destruction of our freedoms and Constitution. Because what we have seen over these last 3+ years will only get worse. Because even if, first of all, because this is who they are, this is what they're committed to. And second of all, as we see in these elections, even if they won by one vote, one electoral vote, they would run around the country telling the American people, you have given us a mandate to continue doing exactly what we've been doing. That's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
When you look at the consequences on our quality of life, on the economy, inflation, debt, the lack of any kind of border security at all, national security threats. We have multiple wars bubbling up on different fronts around the world. On in virtually every example I could give you on the home front as well as on the foreign policy front, they are destroying us, and we cannot allow them to continue. So if we're taking Biden, Harris, whoever may be, popping up on the Democrat front, I think it's important that we just remain very clear-eyed about the best decision for us at this very moment to save our country.
Yeah, and in your book, you seem to. I mean, I don't know Trump. Obviously, you do know him.
I've met him a couple.
Yeah. So, and you say that he is doing this kind of out of love for America and being of service, which I don't know that the average person gets that. You know, my sense is I don't know him, so I can't know what his motivations are. But I think a lot of people sense that it's really just more about him. You know,
here's why I said that, and why I have no hesitation in saying that is because, you know, I mean, like, it's not like we're best friends or any, you know, he's like a confidant or anything, but here's why I don't.
My bestie.
Yeah. Here's why I don't have any hesitation in saying that is look at what he's going through. He has, I think,
been through a lot.
at last count, was it 92 or 97 felony indictments, federal and state level. You know, you've got this real estate deal in New York where he's got to come up with $500 million essentially that he's got to pay. You look at the attacks that are coming from the constant stream of attacks that are coming from the mainstream media. You have, you know, throughout his presidency in 2016, the FBI being used to investigate him under accusations of collusion with Russia, of which they found no evidence.
Was this the like P tapes or whatever
that was a Hillary Clinton disinformation operation with the Steele dossier.
Yep.
Some spy for hire, you know, who's like, hey, we need to get some bad information out about Trump.
Yeah.
They never, you know, there are so many different examples of how he has, people have a much more negative view of him now than they did before he got involved with politics in general.
Oh yeah, they loved him.
He has lost money.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
Yep.
I think reports have shown that his businesses have suffered. Why would... I have no doubt that if he had said after 2020, like, I'm done with politics, he would not be dealing with any of this today. So why would he go and do these things and endure all of this that's affecting him and his family, if not for being motivated by a desire to actually do what's good for the country?
Yeah, the never Trump argument, I guess, that I've read would be that it's just to stay out of jail. Like that.
But that's my point, is if he had walked away in 2020, I don't believe that they would have gone after him.
Right.
It was, you know, because a lot of these lawsuits and charges being filed, when did they start? After he had announced his candidacy that he was running, number one, which when he announced it, a lot of Republicans even were kind of like, oh, this is kind of like a little bit lackluster. There's not a lot of support, but you know, at that time, DeSantis was the guy and he was going to be the nominee and he had all this momentum. It wasn't until Trump, you know, some things started to pick up for him that we saw this onslaught of lawsuits coming from every direction, seeking to hold him up in court so he couldn't actually run a credible campaign and drain him of time and money and resources.
I saw it even recently already with like the bloodbath discourse where he was talking about the auto industry.
Yeah.
And then it gets taken out of context. And my family members and friends who only watch MSNBC or CNN, that's what is in their head.
Yeah.
And there's necessarily, like, here's the thing that.
But I can tell you, just sorry to interrupt you, but just in that example, those families who have lost jobs in the auto industry because of, you know, multinational trade deals that favored other countries over American workers, I think they would relate a lot to the use of that word in particular.
Yeah, I think that I guess it's much easier to just believe that than to have to experience whatever cognitive dissonance occurs. And I'm sure as you've heard, my inbox, we do a series on my Substack letters from the politically homeless. And they're not all politically homeless. There are a lot of people who have been red pilled, people who have gone in the other direction. I think the hardest thing, particularly for former Democrats who don't necessarily recognize their party anymore, it is so uncomfortable to have to sit with that. And not to mention there's a social cost in your whole family and your whole system if you even start becoming the guy that's like, well, what about he didn't actually say bloodbath if I lose, you know?
No, I totally get it. And you know, my family is no different from a lot of other families. People have different ideas and views and feelings and thoughts on different candidates. And I think really what it comes down to is those feelings of discomfort or fear of social stigma, or loss of good friends or family members
or
as
jobs.
A result of this, or jobs. Those are very real things. When it comes right down to it, there's a reason why, you know, like I wouldn't say the things that Trump says sometimes, or, you know, I've got a very different style and would have a very different approach to tackling different issues. But when it comes right down to it, and you look at how the CNNs and the MSNBCs, what they choose to focus on, we have to recognize that it's intentional and that they are choosing not to focus on the fact that we have known terrorists coming across our border. They choose to not focus on the fact that, and someone went over these numbers with me yesterday, that people are paying 60% more for a loaf of bread today than they were just a couple of years ago. That inflation is continuing to worsen.
In trouble.
And who's experiencing the results of this? Not the ultra wealthy people in both parties. It's people like the cost of ramen has gone up by over 60%. It's the food that families are trying to make decisions about what they can afford to buy at the supermarket who are being impacted by this. They are choosing not to focus on the problems with our education system and the fact that the head of one of the biggest teachers unions in the country says that school choice is anti-democracy. So there's so much craziness going on here, and that's where they are intentionally trying to distract us. And using tools that they know work. The words that we don't like to hear, the things that really do make us uncomfortable. We have to have the discipline to recognize this intentional. I mean, in the military, you know, I mean, there is such a thing as an information operation where there's an intentional, like, hey, we want you to look at this shiny object so that you're not looking at this other thing that's happening here, or we want this specific outcome. So we're going to feed you this kind of information so that you don't actually like get distracted by the truth of what's happening in another place. And this is what's happening here. And so what I'm encouraging people to do, focus on the fundamentals of who we are as a country, which allow us the freedom to sit around at work or the dinner table or on a podcast and speak freely. Because that's what's at stake here. And you might not like the words that Trump uses or the way that he says it or the offhanded jokes or whatever it is. You might find his style to be distasteful. But the reality is that if we allow those in power to remain in power, we won't even be able to have these conversations. We won't even be able to work in the way that we want to support our families.
Or we can have them, but it's like even worse. You get, even worse than getting banned, because I feel like they realize that people who get kicked off or banned, it's the Streisand effect. It gives them more attention. Now it's just you get nothing. Like the algorithm just ignores you.
You theoretically disappear.
There's something interesting because I feel like so much of what you wrote in your book I identified with, and I've always been like, character matters,
Yeah.
and
And it does.
and I'm not sure with somebody like Trump because of, I mean, the debt did go up with him too, and there are questionable family things that I'm not sure that but in recovery, there's this, and my husband and I were just talking about this because in recovery, there's this expression, principles before personality.
Mm.
And I was like, in this instance, character matters, yes, but I'm actually putting personality before principles.
Yeah.
And he's the one who's always pointing. He's like, yeah, but what are the principles, Bridget? What are you actually fighting for? Because I understand all the people who are like, well, I can't vote for the Democrats anymore because they've done gone lost their minds.
Yeah.
But I can't vote for Trump either because they feel like it's either more of the same or they can't just hold their nose and vote for him. I have a friend who has, and I've talked about this a bunch and I really should write about it, but he said the like really foundational ideology in America is but the right. It's the only principle. It's like the left can do all of this insane crap and we'll be like, but the right.
Yeah.
But the right. And he's kind of drilled this into my head and now I can't unsee it. It's like everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, the left is, not allowing you to go work for Uber and your kid doesn't read because they didn't go to school for 2 years. But, Trump said bloodbath when he was talking about the auto industry.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of people are like where I am.
I agree.
Some people who the left has lost a lot of people. And I get sometimes mad at the right for not being able to like get it together and put up somebody that should easily be able to beat Biden. But I mean, I don't know. The Trump does seem like he's kind of like made out of Teflon in that respect.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to they will throw everything at you, clearly.
They will. And if they're not, we as voters should be cynical. And I'll use Nikki Haley as an example because she's the most prominent person recently that has been put forward by Republicans to say, well, she herself said that she's the best person to beat Joe Biden. Why is it that she is treated so well across all of the cable news networks?
Yeah.
Why is it that she is seen as there was almost nothing but praise for her coming out of the Washington establishment? Well, she is part of her foreign policy is virtually the same as Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton is the queen of warmongers. Nikki Haley is the queen of warmongers. Nikki Haley talks about the norms. Well, she has been supported by all of these major industries within Washington. She left her job as the UN ambassador early to go and make millions of dollars by serving on the board of one of the big 4 or 5 defense contractors. So, I guess my point is be careful what we wish for.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just because on the right or the Republicans or whatever, yeah, they may put forward someone like a Nikki Haley, which a lot of people saw, well, she's reasonable and she's nice and she's smart and she's this and she's that. Like, okay, well, and this goes back to I think how we started the conversation is like, where are the attacks coming from? And that tells us a lot about whose power is threatened.
Right.
That when, I'm just thinking back of like all the different attacks that came my way. Like Hillary Clinton, as former Secretary of State, said, "Oh, Tulsi Gabbard is being molded by the Russians or is a Russian asset." Well, if Hillary Clinton's attacking me, then I'm definitely on the right track. She and many other Democrats, they use that line of attack against anyone who doesn't agree with their foreign policy of trying to be the policeman of the world and, toppling dictators we like, toppling dictators we don't like, lifting up dictators we do like, putting us into a constant state of war to benefit their friends in the military industrial complex. So regardless of political party, the power of the uniparty in Washington is a very real thing. And it consists of those lobbyists that we talked about. It consists of politicians. It consists of bureaucrats. It consists of people in the media. When they are threatened, you will see the kind of reaction that they've given to people like me, people like Trump, people like Bobby Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just know that as you're looking at the people who are being brought forward, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, I think the average American voter is quite cynical right now.
Good. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
That's a good thing.
I think that there does seem to be just a generalized. That's what worries me too. Is like the pervasive sense of nihilism in the culture. I think it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not on one side or another. I think one side is more, slavishly devoted to like a doomer mindset of like, why have kids? The world is ending.
Which is sad. Which is really, really sad to hear like college kids saying, I don't know if I want to have kids because I don't want them to experience the pain of growing up in such a horrible world.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there wasn't birth control, and I know the argument like, well, they didn't have a choice, but people had kids in much more horrific conditions than we're experiencing now. Even with all of the upheaval and all of the problems we face as a nation, I love that you mentioned our infrastructure.
Yeah.
There's so many things that I want to. We should be focused on building.
Yes.
There's so many. I have so much faith in the creative power of humanity.
Absolutely.
We are so resilient for a species that really survives pretty well in like a small temperature.
Mm-hmm.
We're amazing. Just, I have so much faith in humanity. I don't see us as some scourge on the planet. I don't believe that we would be here if we weren't supposed to be here. And I look at even like the way my daughter is so obsessed with the universe. And then so we're learning all about, and I'm relearning all about these things that we probably learned in science and astronomy, and just miracle upon miracle upon miracle. It is a miracle. There's no one around.
Yeah.
No, anywhere that we know, no one. We're the only planet right now that has life and water, and just how even being pregnant with her, and it is all miraculous.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to lose sight of that, because I know it gets so dark, and that you can doom scroll, and everyone. This is the problem with cynicism, is that it kind of leads. I know for me in recovery, like nihilism is a one-way train that leads to nowhere. And the only antidote for it for me is service and God.
Yes.
And that is the only, and I was not a God person, because I mean, I was raised Catholic, but it's interesting to circle back to what you were saying about the Gita, that helped me kind of heal some of the like angry man in the sky perceptions I had about God. And it gave me a new vision for it. And then God bless recovery, and that some stroke of genius allowed it to be as you understand him or her or it. And that was another process of kind of finding whatever that God, that daily, the conscious contact daily with a God of my understanding. That is brilliant, and it has saved so many millions of lives. And I feel like there's a need for that just on a society level. And I think of how much God was in the founding of this country.
Yeah.
And that was something I was talking to my cousin about it on the way here, when I was talking about that part in your book that really stuck out to me. Like how one party that was kind of the unifying thing. I always knew foundationally God was kind of in both parties. Like they both paid lip service to God at the very least. And having one party go a little bit godless, which feels like communism. I mean, I joke that California was California. There's a lot of damage and lives that have been lost in that name. And people say, oh, all the religious wars and all the lives that have been lost. I'm like, there's a lot of lives that have been lost in no religion too.
Yeah.
Many tens of millions.
Yeah.
And this is where I think what your book helped me. It helped me because it's easy to feel very lost and confused. And I think the past 8 years have forced me to identify the hills that I'll die on. Like free speech was one. I'm like, I'll die on that hill.
Absolutely.
Being able to say men and women are different biologically, another hill I'll die on because reality remains undefeated. You can try and tell me that this isn't true, but it's true.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I tell people, like, identify the hills you'll die on, but it's much like sobriety. And I think you point to this in your book, is that we're at circling the drain towards kind of this rock bottom. I couldn't get sober just to not do something.
Yes.
I needed there to be an aspirational hope. I didn't get sober for my life to get smaller.
Yes.
I needed it to be bigger. I needed to feel like things could grow and I could remain open. I mean, the fact that I got sober in LA was running around doing drugs and now I'm a mom in Texas. I joke. I'm like, I would have never quit drinking. But life is so amazing if you just stay open to, the yes anding of what's unfolding in front of you and staying committed to service, God, and those heart principles.
Yeah.
This is where I feel like you are an important voice, aside from knowing the inner workings of DC, being part of the military, knowing war, experiencing it. You come with the perspective of building and hopefulness and God, because otherwise it's just like, well, we're fucked.
Yes. And that is, first of all, I just want to say thank you. There's so many things I want to say in response to you, but I just want to say thank you for sharing that. You are the first person outside of my team of publishers, editors, proofreaders, whatever, and my husband who's read the book. And my parents haven't read it yet. That's bad on me. That's bad on me. But it really means so much to me to hear about how it impacted you. So thank you for sharing
and the focus
that.
on family, just recentering the family. It's so important.
Yes. And that was my hope with taking the time to write this book and choosing which of those principles to focus on in the book. Because, there are so many quote unquote issues that I could have taken a deep dive on, and people might agree with the approach to immigration or disagree with the approach to this issue or that issue. But I was intentional in focusing each of those chapters on a really foundational and fundamental principle that is not attached to or owned by one party or another. I've had people close to me in my life who've had serious problems with addiction that have led to issues related to, prison and law enforcement, everything.
Yep.
And I'm grateful to have experienced from a young age that true happiness and true purpose in life could only be found in dedicating my life in the best way that I could in service to God. And what better way to be in service to God than to do what I could to work for the well-being of God's children. And so that was a decision I made really early in my life. I had no idea where it would lead. It's taken me, if you had told me back then as a teenager, like, yeah, you're going to be a member of Congress, you're going to run for president, you're going to be a lieutenant colonel in the army, serving over 20 years, you're going to have deployed to these different war zones in different parts of the world, I probably would have like laughed and walked away.
Yeah. Like whatever psychedelics you're on, give them to me.
But I'm so grateful. I am so deeply grateful for the opportunities to serve in different ways that have been presented and that I've kind of dove head first and straight in without always knowing how it's going to work out.
Yeah.
And that's where what you said is really perfect, is that yes, we should be cynical in finding the truth about what's going on around us. We have to have a healthy cynicism, because there is so much crap that not only exists, but is being pushed on us from all different directions. And if we don't maintain that healthy sense of cynicism and that discernment in our seeking of the truth and reality, then we will be easily manipulated in a way that is not only serving the interest of others, but is harmful to us and those that we love and care about. And so what you said is the perfect truth, which is, where do we find hope? We find hope in God and God's unconditional love for every single one of us. Yes, in America. Yes, in the world. God's unconditional love is eternal and unwavering and unchanging, no matter what craziness is going on in our lives. And so as long as God exists and his unconditional love for us exists, there will always be hope. Always. No matter how dark things may seem to be. And we carry him and his love in each of our hearts, no matter where we go, no matter what kind of fucked up shit is going on in our personal lives or around us. God's love is where we find hope.
Yeah.
And for it just really warmed my heart to hear you talk about your own journey and your own experience. And for me, I mentioned some people who are close to me in my life who have gone through that, darkness of addiction to a whole host of different kinds of substances and drugs and the consequences of them, and have gone through their own journey towards recovery. Like I don't drink. I've never drank alcohol. I've never done drugs. I had a lot of friends, who grew up around me who did. But I was never tempted. And not even hey, passing around a joint, hey, why don't you just try it? I literally, the temptation for me was never there. And while it may not make sense to a lot of people, even as a teenager, the thing that I can attribute it to is just, and I'm grateful to have had that early understanding and experience of knowing that I am content and happy in my relationship with God and what I'm trying to do with my life. So I was never even innocently feeling like I had to try to fill some vacuum or gap by trying a bunch of different things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it is God is where we find hope. And that is our way. That is our way forward.
Yeah.
That is what lights our path forward.
So many people have broken relationships with God, and I get it. I understand, let down by the church, let down by people
who claim to be representatives of God, but who are really only out for themselves. And you mentioned, wars.
Yeah.
Wars waged in the name of religion.
Yep.
That was not based on God's teaching. That was based on people who were very oftentimes driven by a desire for power, trying to hold on to it or oppress people and take what they could for themselves.
It's still so, the rational part of me is very much like, oh, God, like there's just that part of me that's like, God, okay. It's such a hard because it's such an intangible, it sounds kind of ridiculous. And my husband and I talk about this all the time, where we say, we wake up every morning, we say the third step prayer. It's a prayer from recovery. And there's this line in it that says, relieve me of the bondage of self. Which
Can you tell me what it is?
Yes. God, we offer ourselves, well, I'll say the we version since that's what we say.
Right.
God, we offer ourselves to thee, to do with, oh my gosh, I'm going to like blank on it.
Sorry,
I say
I'm
every
putting you on the
morning.
spot.
No, it's just like God, we offer ourselves to thee. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on it. And I say it. I'm like completely blanking
That's
on
okay. Don't worry about it.
Relieve us of the bondage of yourself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those we would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May we do thy will always.
That is beautiful.
It's gorgeous. And thank you. And we say it every morning, and it's just our first thing that we say. But he had relieve me of the bondage of self written on like a little Etsy piece of wood that we have right over our mirror. So it's also the first thing we see. And we always joke because our daughter is a miracle. I mean, they told me I couldn't have a baby, that I was in menopause, and just and we kind of came to, we were like, well, we're fine. We'll just travel and have money and be the cool parents and whatever. And we joke all the time when she's up at 3 a.m, like, I meant like, give me more time to meditate, right. Not actually relieve me of the bondage of self. And now our in-laws have moved here and they're aging. He's like, who would have ever thought in our drug addicted 20s that we would have a toddler and aging parents that we're, making food for and taking care of. But our life, I'm like, this is all that matters. It's just for me starting right where I am, because when I was on Glenn Beck recently, it was right after the kind of Fannie Willis stuff was breaking and how she was basically going to get they're like, whatever.
Yeah.
Perjure yourself, whatever. Anyone else, and it would be a different story. And so he was very, mad, and it's like, it's so unjust, and there's so many things we have to focus on. And I'm like, yeah, but the average American sitting in rush hour.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out how to pay, and their car insurance is going up, and a rock hit their windshield and now it's cracked. And I'm very much middle class. I live out with the kind of middle class, and I know that they're not able to focus on all of this all the time. And I think they feel overwhelmed by it because, on a macro level, it makes a difference, obviously, who the president is. But really, locally, those elections are probably more important. Who's on your school board?
Yeah.
And people ask me what I do. I'm like, I just do what I can locally. Like, my neighbor had a baby, so I made her food.
Yeah.
Try and create community because I feel like the fabric of society is being shredded a bit.
Yes.
What other tips do you have for people who can't necessarily, focus on all of this, but feel I think there's a helpless feeling that people have in the face of like, well, our bridges are crumbling and our borders being invaded and our schools, no one can read and like, fuck it.
Yeah. I mean, at a basic level, treat people with respect and kindness, be a good person. The reason why I'm dedicated, I'm not on a ballot. I'm not running for any office. The reason I'm spending my time really traveling across the country, speaking to groups of people, doing podcasts, doing different kinds of media, sounding the alarm on what is happening in our country and why this election is so critical is specifically because we can't afford to limit our vision and our care and attention to our immediate circle, even our local community. And here's why. Our founders created those documents and envisioned for our country to be a country with limited government so that we could do exactly that. Focus on our local community, be able to talk to your local mayor or your local board of education member if you had a concern about what was going on in the school, and that you wouldn't have a big brother federal government dictating to your local school who's allowed to, play that boys are allowed to play against your daughter.
Or those dystopian, 6 feet apart squares.
Which now, of course, they're like, oh, it's very arbitrary. Yeah, that just came out of nowhere.
And no accountability, by the way.
Zero accountability.
For any of that. People died alone.
Exactly.
This is another thing that I think radicalized me a little bit into being like, oh, no, I'm going to have to fight.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to fight.
No, we all would love nothing more. I would love nothing more than to be able to go and be in Hawaii, go surfing every morning, come back, do some work and, just live that chill life. That'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
But when we have a federal government, and this is why I have a lot of friends who say exactly that to me, just like, hey, I live in rural Colorado, or I live in a small town, in a small community here or there, and we all know each other. We all got each other's backs. That's all that matters. If the problems are not knocking on your door today, they will be tomorrow. And I have a quote that I closed the book with from President Lincoln.
I love that quote.
In a speech where he warns that if we, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, but if that we as a country are to be destroyed, it will only be because we did it to ourselves. And he used the word suicide specifically. And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. And so in the book, I say that just as, and unfortunately, I know too many people personally, mostly veterans, who have felt as though there is no hope for themselves and there is no place in this world and no purpose to their lives, that they have taken their own lives. And the immediate feeling that I have is, I wish they had called me. I wish I knew that this person was struggling in the way that they were. I just saw them and we hung out last week. Everything seemed fine. I wish that somehow I had seen some warnings so that I could try to save them.
Yeah.
Similarly, that's the moment that we're at in this country. All the warning signs are there about this is the direction that we are headed. And if we don't engage, and maybe you don't have time, as most people don't have time, the most news you listen to might be talk radio as you're stuck in rush hour traffic. I guarantee you probably have a friend who's pretty deeply, tuned in. I'll use that word, tuned in to what's going on. Ask them, just say, hey, tell me what's going on. Tell me what I need to know. We need to get to a place where the federal government is limited to what the Constitution allows. Instead of what we are seeing, where you've got a governor here in Texas who's trying to secure his state's border, which the Constitution says he has the authority to do, to defend his own state from incursion, and a federal government that is not only opposed to it, but getting the courts involved and physically, actively undoing the work he is doing to secure the border. We talked about education. There are so many examples. The federal government and the abuse of power is out of control. And their both their policies as well as their actions take their weaponization of the power that they have against those who challenge their authority. It is knocking on our doorstep. And we can't allow ourselves to get to a place where it's too late.
Yeah.
And that's, and so, yes, who is running for Board of Education is hugely important. Who is running for your county council or your city council, hugely important. Things like zoning of land.
Yeah.
How and where is development occurring, and all of these things are critical. Infrastructure, critical. These all impact our everyday lives. And also at the state and federal levels, the policies, the people that we have in power there are already and will continue to have a direct impact on our everyday lives and those that we love and care about.
I know. I mean, this was something we learned really when we were trying to decide whether or not to leave California.
Yeah.
Was that you can't get outside of big government when it's that big and when it's that powerful.
Yeah.
And there was nothing. We were sure moved to a red county in California, but you're still in California.
Right.
And we left my mother-in-law, my aunt who's like my mother. We left people we loved behind because we didn't feel like there was ever a chance for us to get out of the lane that they wanted us in.
Yeah.
Because there is not really upward mobility at all in that state anymore. Not like there was. It's crazy. Right. It's crazy. And my biggest fear is like they're going to pull a switcheroo at the convention and swap in Newsom or something. Yeah. And then California will come to all of America and I'll have to move to Portugal or something.
It's hard. It is hard to think about, you know, where in the country would you go? Actually,
you couldn't go anywhere.
Like we have a lot of Brazilians who come to Hawaii for the surf.
Yeah.
You look at what's happening there.
Yeah.
And you know, I am not an expert on Brazilian governance, but Glenn Greenwald lives there.
Yep.
He saw his husband imprisoned and he was a member of Congress in that country.
Yep.
You know, the former president is being indicted right now. I saw the headline this morning. He's been Bolsonaro being indicted for falsifying him and his family's vaccination cards.
Oh, wow.
Because they didn't get the vaccine, but they got someone to give them fake vaccine cards.
Like half of California.
I know. Which, you know, it's like, it is, what is it? I think it was one of Stalin's like biggest enforcers, like his guy who said, find me the crime and I'll give you the man. Meaning there are so many laws in this country, and we're seeing in other parts of the world too, but there are so many laws at the county, state, and federal level that if you've got a target on your back because you challenge those in power, they will turn you into a criminal.
Yeah.
They will. Let's go back to hope.
We're going to end on hope. I know we need to wrap it up. No.
Now that we have thoroughly been successful in freaking you out if you weren't already.
No, I mean, I think most people are. It's weird because it's an election at the same time that feels more important than ever and at the same time more demoralizing than ever.
Yeah.
So just from an age perspective alone, people are like, again, we're doing this again. You know, we couldn't get not even just like boomers even. These are like members of the silent generation.
Yeah.
So I think young people in particular feel like it's interesting doing comedy again and the thing I realize that I love about comedy is that direct feedback you have from the audience. And I started doing it in Austin and it's like I recently went to Dallas and did it kind of out in Fort Worth and it was a late show on a Friday and a lot of people with families and it was for Dave Landau and his audiences are just the best audiences ever. And the audiences here, I was like, oh, thank God you guys are normal, not like these childless freaks I've been joking for. But it was, I mean, 5 shows I did and I was the only one who had a child. So none of that material, and I'm in a city, so that's common, but and I was like, I can't figure out what motivates Gen Z and below at all.
Yeah.
And my friend said, I don't know that they know what motivates them other than getting famous on TikTok, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. But I have nephews and family members who are Gen Z and they're like I also think they're like the coolest generation around.
Yeah.
So
I think like a lot of things, you know, even as like to say like all Democrats are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
All Republicans are not the same. The words conservative and progressive mean very different things to different people.
Yep.
And I think even as I look at the quote unquote Gen Z population, there are a lot of problems in, again, the education system, to where we have a population of kids whose education is not rooted in this understanding of who we are as a country, even. And so that's why things like freedom of speech are now being debated as to whether or not it's even relevant.
Yeah.
But I've also seen, again, some of my friends' kids who are teenagers now. I think there's at least amongst young boys, there's been also this overreaction in the opposite direction of an utter and complete rejection.
Yeah.
Of what I guess could be labeled like the woke narrative, but they consider themselves like extreme conservatives.
Yeah, I had Jimmy Fallon on recently, and he is also hilarious.
Yes.
And but he was saying the like counterculture move right now is to be pro-Trump or to be conservative.
Yeah.
It's like particularly if you're a young man, it's kind of the counterculture thing is to be red-pilled, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And they kind of grew up with all of this like DEI.
The whole trans thing. If you're 12 years old and you don't feel like you're born in the right body, like all of it, which it's just, it's interesting. It is interesting to kind of see the diversity of thought.
Yeah.
And the fact, like, which is true of all generations, really, is none of us are living as like a monolithic part of a bigger entity.
Yeah.
But also I think it points to how we should be willing to engage with people who have different backgrounds and different mindsets, and actually have these kind of dialogues and conversations, and not just assume that because you're part of a generation or a political party or this or that you therefore think in this way.
Yeah.
And be open to recognizing, hey, I might be able to learn something from you. My brother-in-law is Gen Z, and he uses all the words that irritate me. It's like, no caps. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, no
Tell
cap.
me, what does that mean?
No cap.
There's like new things all the time, which is like, okay, cool,
You're
man.
like,
but
we're
like,
the olds now.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's kind of weird.
It
freaky, but you know, like they're also like really thoughtful.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm encouraged by is that generation. There's a lot of young people who consider themselves Republicans or conservatives who really care about the environment.
I know.
And that's awesome.
Yeah, there's a new Benji, I think his name is. He's a young kid. Well, I mean, he's not a kid anymore. He's a young man, and he has a book coming out, and it's all about why this is a conservative thing.
Yeah.
That they should
traditionally was
conserving the environment and stewards of our planet. And he's been really pushing for that. And
that being distinct from the radical, like quote unquote climate change activists who are, destroying artifacts and sitting in front of traffic and screaming and yelling and disrupting and really not making
I'm always
a whole
like,
lot
clean
of sense.
the beach.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, go clean the beach. It'd be more productive than this.
Yes. So there is hope.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't cast aside, because I hear people do all the time, oh, young people these days.
But that's what they said about Gen
X. I know. And they said that about us when we were growing up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, these young people.
That's what I mean. They said that about us. They were like, oh, you guys are all apathetic and you don't care. And I'm like, and now we created the internet and brought you like all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't create the internet, but
the collective we did.
The collective we. Well, what is your biggest defect of character?
Characteristic of myself?
These are the two questions I ask at the end.
That's a good question. Sometimes this is something I'm just thinking about. What are the things that my husband comes after me for? Because he's the one who sees it all.
It's so funny that you said that, because I was just thinking, if someone asked me that question, I'd be like, what would my husband say?
Exactly.
Because they know.
They know. And they know and communicate it with love.
Yeah.
And care.
Yep. If they're good partners,
yes. If they're good partners, yes. I think that there was a period in my life where I did not I did not do a good job of finding balance.
Mm.
And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh yeah, cool, figured it out, done deal. Of course, it's a daily choice
Mm-hmm.
and decision. But particularly I'm thinking about, when I first was elected to Congress, but at different periods in my life, you may think that you're putting the quote unquote mission first, and you're doing the good work, so to speak. But in my, I have found at different times where I was doing those things, and that's what I was telling myself, and this is for a good purpose, it's a good cause, and it's this and it's that. But not making the time to spend that time first thing in the morning in solitude with God.
Yeah.
And not making the time to, like, okay, this body is a vehicle for me to be able to serve. And so I better take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nutrition,
Put the mask on
eat
first.
healthy, exercise,
Mm-hmm.
do yoga, do my, I like to challenge myself physically, be, just because I like being able to see that growth and development, but also because the more I challenge myself physically, it allows me to completely turn off my brain
Yes.
for that period of time. And so, it's something that I think is focusing on that spiritual, physical, and mental health and well-being
Mm-hmm.
is essential. And there have been different times in my life where I've failed
Mm-hmm.
at that. And part of that is our personal relationships,
Yep.
with our spouses, partners, family, and so forth. So I would say that's one that is obviously, it's a constant, like I said, it's an everyday, hour by hour, day by day decision and choice. And knowing that, hey, I can't, if I am not if I lose touch with or become disconnected with my spiritual grounding, then what am I really doing this all for?
Yes. Yeah. And that's when you start, for me, that's when I start feeling spun out and saying, what's it all for?
Well, yes. And then you, whether you realize it or not, you are opening the doors to, and welcoming, other influences, other motives
Yep.
that you may tell yourself, like, oh, this is, I'm doing this for some altruistic purpose. But, and I've seen it in friends of mine
Yep.
who, for example, go and run for office and get elected to Congress with the best of intentions. But in some cases, very quickly, within a year, within the first 2 years of being in office, get arrested for buying cocaine from an undercover cop in Washington, D.C. And
Yeah.
it's just, it is the most important thing.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's, I could probably list off a few other things, but I think I know that's the most important thing in my life. And
It's so hard to remember.
yeah, it can be because life is busy.
Yeah.
There's so much going on. It's
Yep.
and technology. It's so
Yep.
easy to wake up in the morning and just be like,
Scroll.
pick up the phone, what's
Yep.
going on? And then meanwhile, you just dumped a whole bunch of crap
I
in your
know.
consciousness
It's
from
the
the get-go.
worst when I'm doing that.
And it's way too easy.
It's so easy.
And it is nice though, like when I make the time, put my phone on do not disturb, literally physically put it away, go. We went for a walk yesterday morning, like didn't bring the phone, like I don't care. Like whatever's going on, it can wait.
Yep.
I just, it's essential.
Yeah.
It's essential.
And what's your biggest asset?
I would say resilience and an ability to remain calm in the face of fire.
Mm-hmm.
Were
you always like that, or was that military?
No, I think I was. I've always been that way,
Mm-hmm.
and it it has only grown. It's only grown, I guess, and developed in different ways as I've been tested in different ways, whether it's been in the military and, you know, you've got incoming mortars coming at you in the camp, or, you know, I remember we had a live shooter in DC when I was in Congress, and I remember calling in to talk to Wolf Blitzer live on the air as this was happening, as I'm like sitting and crouched under the window in our office. And I didn't reflect on, like, I didn't think about this at all. I was just, you know, he's like, okay, hey, can you tell us what's going on? Like, well, this is what's going on. This is what happened. This is what's currently going on. And this is what's this and this and that. And someone told me after, like, you sounded so calm. And class, you know, it's, but that is rooted, and we talked about this earlier, just of knowing who I am and my purpose in life, and you know, this path of service to God that I've dedicated my life to, knowing those things to be true without a shadow of a doubt, are what has made it possible for me to find that peace and resilience and that focus in times of chaos or hardship, and that has only grown stronger over time.
The other thing, and I'll be so mad if I don't bring this up from your book, that really struck me is today the day.
Yes.
Oh, I feel like I live that way anyways. It's just like my default, almost like a stoic mentality of you just never know when you're going to walk out a door and not come home. It happens all the time. I had a lot of loss young, so maybe that was just something I became hyper aware of. But I feel like I was hyper aware of it even as a little kid. And that sign, I have like little signs kind of all over that are triggers in my house. And now I want to put that up somewhere because could be any day.
Any day.
And we lose sight of that. It's easy to lose sight of. You kind of have to just to survive, but it's a good thing to remember. It's just so, you know, it's hard to face the morbidity of just our fleeting nature of our existence. But
you know, there is, I mean, if you want to look at it from through a morbid lens, that is a way. But it also provides us with the opportunity. And for those who are listening or watching, I'll just briefly mention there was a sign in at the gate of one of the gates in our camp in Iraq in 2005. I don't know who put it up there, but it was in big block letters, "Is today the day?" And you saw that I included a picture of that sign in the book. But it was a daily, I was confronted with that reality every day.
Yep.
And it was a daily opportunity to reflect. And it was not like, oh my God, I could die today. It was not a trigger for depression or darkness or, you know, thoughts of just like being surrounded by death.
Right.
More so a recognition of just the reality of, along with life comes death.
Yep.
And, but that we are eternal spirits, children of God. And so the death that is real for every one of us as humans, does not equate the end of us and who we are and those that we love. And also, it's an opportunity for us to recognize the gift of life and how blessed we are with this life that we have and the opportunities that we have, and to make it count and to live with that higher purpose, to serve, to love God, to love others. And whether it's making food for your neighbor who just had a baby, or it's dedicating, you know, there's no single path or way to do that. We all are different. We're all unique people. We have different callings in our lives, different skills, different gifts. You know, stand-up comedy. You are empowering people to maybe think about things differently. You are exercising free speech. You're emboldening others to actually live free and be unburdened. I hate using unburdened because that's a Kamala Harris word now. But
not hers. We're taking it back, Kamala. No,
let go of like baggage or crap you might be carrying around.
Laughter.
Exactly.
Every time that laughter hits me when I get on stage, that first laugh, I am overcome with God and just gratitude.
Yes.
I feel so grateful to be able to do that.
Exactly.
And it's so spontaneous.
Yeah.
You know, this is one of the things that I hate that the culture has taken from people is they are censoring their laugh. I'm seeing in certain places. Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you see people looking around and like,
and it's like,
is it okay to laugh at this?
I don't want to sound like a crazy, right winger, but like they took that from you. Yeah. That is something you should allow to spontaneously come forward.
Like the big deep belly laugh. That's the best.
It's not something, it's like holding a sneeze in. Yeah. It's not something that that's a deep level of self-censorship.
Yes.
Censoring your laugh.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful
I'm so glad I've never really thought about it that way.
Oof.
But to take away a person's innate ability to feel joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's heavy.
That is what I really want to focus on in this coming year, because it is a fight, but I also want people to feel joyful and remember it, I think you said something in your book too, just about how this is, as long as you're in the body, it's the eternal is actually when we're not in the body.
Exactly.
And I was thinking of my daughter's obsessed with Moana, which is the greatest Disney movie of all time, undoubtedly. But there's that line that always makes me emotional when the grandma is like, there's nowhere on earth that I can't. She's like, I don't want you to leave me. And she's like, I'm going to get emotional.
Yeah.
And she's like, there's nowhere on earth that you can go that I won't be with you.
Exactly.
And I love that. I think that is, I remember when my friend Henny passed away, I was in the room and it was this moment where you could feel his essence filling up the room.
Yes.
Like the room was vibrating as he was leaving his body. It was wild. I was like, I was sober. I was present. It was like, this is just so crazy that I get to witness this, but also you could feel him expanding into everything. It was wild.
And that I think is the most important truth for us to know in our hearts. And that's where I get in the book is like, all the problems that we see with racism and political divisiveness, like all of these things are rooted in a false sense of identity where you think, well, I am a Polynesian, South Asian, Caucasian woman. You see a very real mental conflict in whether it's kids or adults who are saying, well, I was born in the wrong body. I am not the person that is this body. Well, no, you're not actually. You are that eternal spirit, that eternal child of God, truly. And this body is temporary. And so there is so much unhappiness and suffering that comes from that false sense of identification, of identifying as a superficial label or feature or whatever the case may be. And this is where the power of Aloha comes in.
I loved that in your book too.
And a lot of, for obvious reasons, it's a word that almost everyone in the world knows, but doesn't actually know what it means. But it's a beautiful thing. Every time I'm in Hawaii and I see, it's usually like the Native Hawaiian elders or kupuna who truly greet each other in the actual traditional Native Hawaiian way, where they will come and instead of a traditional hug or just a kiss on the cheek or whatever, they will come and they will put each other's hands on each other's shoulders, close their eyes, touch foreheads and noses, and you just pause. And you both share breath. And so aloha, what it means, alo means to share, and ha is a word that represents that eternal life that we all are. And by greeting each other in this way, with that physical representation or with the word, it is that reminder in the deepest spiritual sense of who we really are. You and I coming together as recognizing each other as spiritual beings, as eternal spirit, children of God. And the reason why we greet each other in that way is to be able to get past all of the superficial crap that so often gets in the way, creates obstacles for us to have a truly meaningful connection and dialogue. You come from LA. I would never choose to live there. I've not been a big fan of LA because every time that I've gone there, I see just walking down the street or sitting in a cafe watching people. It's like so many people, I can tell, like they're giving each other the up and down. Like, who are you? Are you someone famous? Are you beautiful? Are you powerful? Do I need to get to know you?
It's
Washington, D.C. is the same way. I know
ugly people.
I worked there as a staffer first. And yes, for ugly people. I worked there as a staffer first, and I noticed right away, like you go into a restaurant, like right there on Capitol Hill, and it's just, it's the exact same transactional approach to other humans.
Yep.
Like if people would ask me again, I was working as a legislative aide for one of our U.S. senators from Hawaii, and people would come up and say like, hey, how's it going? Who do you work for? What do you do?
Yeah.
And if it wasn't interesting enough, be like, yeah, cool. They're looking directly past you, even as you're still having a conversation.
Yep.
And so many of our politicians do that because they don't actually care.
Yeah.
They don't actually care. And that's where the power of aloha, this power of our true identity, it really is. And this is what I close the book with. This is the answer. This is the answer. There are a lot of problems that I point out in that book, and it's not comprehensive in the sense that there are many more. I could write 10 books probably, but the answer is beautifully simple. It also may be hard for some people to give up and let go of these things, these labels or things that they associate with influence and power and all of these other things. But if we are able to do this, is truly live that spirit of aloha and make that choice every day. This is not connected to a religion or organized religion or other labels. It is the reality and truth of who we are. And if we remember that and are inspired by that love that is intrinsic to a recognition of this true identity, this will guide us and inspire us and move us toward that better and brighter future, that more perfect union our founders talked about, and a future where your daughter can grow up living the dream that Martin Luther King talked about.
Yeah.
Where we judge each other by our character, not by the color of our skin, not by any of these other labels that are so often used to tear us apart. And that's what's happening. And that's what we need to stop.
I think that's a perfect place to end. Aloha.
This has been wonderful. Aloha, Bridget.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Thank you. Walk-Ins Welcome is brought to you by Phetasy Productions. We are no longer on a network. We are completely independent. If you love this show and you love what we do, we are asking more now than ever before for you to join us in our community at Phetasy.com. Become a paid supporter and help support the podcast that you love. Being that we are independent means we're taking all of the expenses back, and that means that we need our listeners to support us. If you're also listening and you have a product and you want to advertise with us, please email me at phetasy@gmail.com. We're hoping that we leap and the net will appear. Please become a paid supporter at Phetasy.com and help us stitch our net together. Thank you.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.